The black orphan boy who knocked on a white professor's door and claimed he could make her husband see and walk again. I think your husband can walk again, ma'am, but I need your trust first. Those words came from a barefoot black boy no older than 10, standing on the porch of a prestigious white neighborhood at sunrise, as if God himself had pushed him there. Professor Margaret Ellison blinked twice, clutching her coffee mug, steam curling past her white curls. She thought it was a prank, some cruel joke, some summer camp dare. The boy stood still, unwavering, his eyes so deep with loss and purpose they unnerved her. Behind her, inside the house, the rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside her husband's hospital bed pulsed steadily, a melody of helplessness she had grown used to after the accident. She almost closed the door. Almost. But something about the way the boy said trust, like he hadn't heard that word in years, made her pause. "Who are you?" she asked, voice flat, defensive. "I'm Isaiah. I sleep at the bus depot now," he replied, eyes not leaving hers. "But I used to live with someone who knew things. Fix things. Help people. Before they were gone." Her fingers tightened around the doorknob. "This is not a shelter." "I know. But this isn't just about shelter. I came for him," Isaiah said, pointing toward the hallway where her husband lay motionless, blind, paralyzed since the crash 8 months ago. "I think I can help." Margaret's jaw clenched. She stepped back from the door and narrowed her eyes. "You're a child." Isaiah didn't flinch. So was David when he faced Goliath. She scoffed, almost laughed. Then something in her cracked like a hairline fracture that had been waiting for the right moment to split wide open. She didn't let him in, not yet. But she didn't shut the door either. 2 hours later, after much pacing and internal war, Margaret brought him a glass of water and let him sit in the hallway, just far enough not to see the man he claimed he could heal. Isaiah refused the water. "If you want me to try, I need to touch his feet," he said quietly. "Absolutely not," Margaret snapped. "This is absurd. My husband is a former NASA researcher. His spinal cord is severed. His optic nerves are crushed. This is not something a street boy can mend by touching his feet." Isaiah didn't reply. He just stared at the floor and whispered something under his breath like a prayer or a memory. The silence that followed was unbearable. Margaret turned away, ashamed of the voice in her head that screamed, "Don't trust him. Don't trust his kind." She hated that voice. She had spent years pretending it wasn't there, teaching at universities, publishing books about empathy, social justice, racial equity. But now it whispered with smug superiority. She returned the next day. He was still there, still sitting on the porch step. Same shirt, same shoes, none. "You slept here?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" "You didn't say no." Margaret shook her head. She had written peer-reviewed journals on cognitive bias and white privilege, lectured on institutionalized racism. But this was no theory. This was a ragged boy who had nothing, offering something impossible. By day 3, she let him enter the room. Isaiah stepped toward the bed, the way some people enter churches. Her husband, Charles, lay still, mouth slightly agape, eyes open but vacant, the once brilliant physicist reduced to a silent witness of the world he could no longer see or move in. The boy knelt, placed one small hand on each of Charles's feet. He closed his eyes, whispered again, in a tongue Margaret didn't recognize. It wasn't English. It wasn't any academic language. It was older. Nothing happened. Of course it didn't. "Thank you," she said, trying to sound kind, but it came out brittle. "You've done all you can." Isaiah looked up, eyes calm. "He'll feel heat tonight. Maybe pain. That's good. Don't stop it. Let it burn." "Burn?" Margaret stepped back. "What are you doing?" "I'm not doing it. I just ask. If he wants to walk, he will." And then he left. That night, Charles screamed. Margaret rushed in, terrified. His body was shaking. Sweat soaked the sheets. His fingers twitched. His legs, those cold, lifeless legs, jerked once. It could have been a spasm, a seizure, nerve trauma, anything but what it seemed. At 3:12 a.m., Charles spoke for the first time in months. "Margaret, I can feel my feet." She fell to the ground, knees buckling. Tears burst from her eyes, uninvited and overwhelming. She hadn't heard his voice since the crash. She had memorized its absence. Doctors arrived. Tests were run. Explanations were thrown like darts in the dark. Nothing made sense. On the 7th day, Isaiah returned. She found him sitting in her backyard, watching the sunrise. He spoke, she whispered, approaching him. I know. You healed him? No, Isaiah said. He healed himself. I just reminded his body how to listen. She sat beside him, no longer a professor, no longer a skeptic, just a woman whose walls had been cracked open by something she couldn't explain. Who taught you? My grandmother. Before they took her. Who? Isaiah didn't answer. Margaret looked at him closely. The scars on his arms, the hollowness in his cheeks, the way he didn't flinch when thunder clapped in the distance. You're not safe where you are you? No, ma'am. Then you're staying here. Isaiah turned to her, face unreadable. Even if the neighbors talk? They always talk, she said, placing a hand on his. Let them talk. And for the first time since his arrival, Isaiah smiled. A small, tired smile. The kind that doesn't belong on a boy that young. But it was something. A beginning. She didn't know then how far this would go. That Isaiah's presence would divide the neighborhood. That she would be called a traitor, a fool, and worse. That the police would get involved. That Isaiah's past would come knocking louder than he ever did. But she also didn't know that her husband would walk again. That he'd dance with her in their living room by Christmas. Or that a boy once thrown away by the world would be the one to teach it how to heal. It started with whispers. First from the next-door neighbor, Mrs. Danvers, who paused mid-sprinkler duty to frown at Isaiah pulling weeds in the Ellisons' garden. Then from the mailman, who noted the sudden presence of a black child in an all-white cul-de-sac. By the end of the week, the HOA had sent a polite but pointed letter. Concerned residents have noticed unregistered occupants at 414 Magnolia Drive. Margaret tore it in half. Then she tore it again. The second week brought more than whispers. Cars slowed down when passing her house. An anonymous complaint was made about loitering. Someone left a banana peel on the Ellisons' porch rail. Isaiah saw it first. He said nothing, just picked it up, tossed it away, and went back to folding laundry. Margaret wanted to scream, but Isaiah never did. And so she didn't either. Meanwhile, Charles improved fast. With daily therapy and Isaiah's quiet check-ins, he was standing with support by week 3. His doctors were astonished. They used words like unprecedented, inexplicable, and possibly misdiagnosed. But they knew better. Charles knew better. She's glowing again, he whispered to Isaiah one morning. As they sat side by side in the sunroom, Margaret visible through the glass, humming while pruning her violets. She never stopped, Isaiah replied softly. You just stopped seeing. Charles looked at him, then really looked at him. The boy's eyes carried a wisdom that couldn't be learned in school. He didn't ask more questions. He didn't need to. But the town did. On a Thursday, Officer Warren showed up. Tall, clean-cut, with the stiff posture of someone always looking for a reason to escalate. Margaret met him on the porch. Good morning, Professor Ellison, he said. Just doing a wellness check. On who? On you. On your household. We received a report of a minor staying here without proper guardianship or clearance. Margaret's smile was razor-thin. So, someone saw a black child at my home and decided it was a crisis? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Warren shifted. Ma'am, I just need to ask the boy a few questions. You can ask me. I'm his guardian now. That's not how this works. Isaiah stepped out before she could stop him. It's okay, Professor. Warren looked down at him. Son, what's your full name? Isaiah Cole. Where are your parents? Dead. There was no emotion in the word. Just truth. Any relatives? No. Were you in the system? Isaiah didn't reply. Margaret spoke up. He was failed by the system. That's why he's here. Warren narrowed his eyes. That may be, but if he's underage and undocumented, then maybe document this. Charles called from inside. He stood, unsteady but upright, gripping his walker. This boy saved my life. Warren stared, stunned. He knew Charles. Everyone did. A respected scientist, paralyzed and blinded. Now standing in his living room. The officer muttered something about paperwork and left. Margaret closed the door behind him, chest heaving. Isaiah looked at her. You didn't have to lie for me. I didn't. I told the truth, she said, her voice thick. Just not the kind they care about. Isaiah became family. He slept in the attic guest room. Margaret bought him socks. Charles taught him chess. The house that had once been a tomb filled again with laughter, music, purpose. But comfort, they would learn, is a fragile thing. One Sunday morning, as Charles and Isaiah tended to the garden, a brick flew through the window. Margaret screamed. The sound of glass shattering ricocheted through the house like a gunshot. On the brick was a note. White traitors. Black magic. Isaiah knelt silently to pick up the shards. Charles shook with rage. Margaret called the police. This time, Warren didn't come. No one did. It took 3 more threats before they stopped calling. Margaret wrote to the local paper. An open letter to my neighbors, she titled it. She recounted how Isaiah had helped save her husband, how he had never asked for anything, how he worked harder than any child should ever have to. She ended with, "If you fear him, it is not because of what he has done. It is because of what you have been taught to see. I see a healer. I see a son." The letter went viral. Online, thousands applauded. But offline, at Magnolia Drive, the lawn signs turned colder. "Protect our children. We don't want sorcery here." And one day, a sign that read simply, "Send him back." But there was nowhere to send him back to. Isaiah stayed. Not because he was fearless, but because he refused to run. One day, he opened up to Margaret. "She died in a fire," he said quietly, spooning soup at the table. "My grandma." White boy said it. Said she was a witch. Margaret froze. Charles put down his fork. "She was a healer. People came from all over. Didn't matter their color. She never asked for anything but their trust." "And you?" Charles asked gently. "I watched. Learned. Listened. I wasn't supposed to touch the sacred things until I turned 13. But she didn't make it." Silence settled around the table like fog. "I've been running ever since," he added. "Until your door." Margaret reached across the table, hand trembling slightly, and touched his wrist. "You never have to run again." But she didn't know then that it wasn't over. That someone in the neighborhood had contacted Child Protective Services. That Isaiah's past would be dissected, mistranslated, weaponized. That they would come for him in broad daylight, in a van marked with nothing but letters, DHS. When they did, Margaret threw herself in front of the doorway. "You will not take him," she snarled. "You don't have legal custody," the agent replied. "We have a court order." Charles stood beside her, cane in hand. "He's not just in our house. He is our house. You'll have to go through both of us." But they had the law. They took him anyway. And as the van drove off, Isaiah turned back, eyes not panicked but calm, as if he had always known this would come. Margaret stood on the porch, fists clenched, tears streaming. "I swear to you," she whispered, "I'm not done." It took less than 6 minutes to undo what had taken 2 months to build. Isaiah was placed in a holding facility for undocumented minors, though he wasn't undocumented. He had no papers because his grandmother had raised him off the grid, believing the system would chew him up and spit him out. And now it had. Margaret drove to the center that afternoon, Charles beside her, both trembling with fury. But the guards at the gate shook their heads. "Only immediate family." "I am his family," Margaret shouted. "Ma'am, do you have legal guardianship?" "No, but he lives with us. He calls me professor. He eats at my table. He saved my husband's life." The guard remained still. "If you don't leave, I'll have to call security." "For what?" "Trying to protect a child from a world that keeps punishing him for surviving." Another guard approached. Margaret's fists clenched, but Charles took her hand gently. "We'll get him out," he said. "Not like this. But we will." And they did. Margaret called every lawyer she knew. Civil rights attorneys, immigration lawyers, child advocacy experts. Most said the same thing: it's complicated. Until one woman, a sharp-tongued black lawyer named Daphne Rivers, said, "Send me everything." Within a week, she filed a petition to grant Margaret emergency foster care status. The court date was set for Friday. But Friday was too far away. Inside the center, Isaiah was breaking. He wasn't abused, not in the way people usually mean. But he was caged, watched, spoken to like an animal. Other boys mocked him. The guards ignored him. He was alone again. One night, a counselor asked him why he was humming in the dark. "It helps keep the shadows away," Isaiah said. The man sneered. "You one of those voodoo kids?" Isaiah didn't answer. But something flickered in his chased-in ember of what his grandmother had taught him. That gifts and used rot. That silence can turn holy if held right. So he sang softly to the walls, to himself, to the ghosts. And outside, on Magnolia Drive, a storm rolled in. At the courthouse, the judge wore horn-rimmed glasses and skepticism like armor. "Professor Ellison," he began, "you are attempting to assume guardianship over a minor with no verified birth certificate, no known relatives, and no formal educational record. You are also not of his race, not a registered foster parent, and are in a neighborhood currently under investigation for racially charged incidents. Why should this court trust you? Margaret stood, spine straight, voice clear. Because he trusted me first. The judge arched a brow. My husband was a broken man, she continued. Not just physically, emotionally. After the accident, he wanted to die. Isaiah brought him back. Not with medicine. Not with magic. But with presence. With belief. I've seen doctors fail, institutions fail, neighbors fail. But that boy never once broke a promise. If he says something is possible, I believe him. Because it already was. The judge leaned forward. Are you suggesting this child has supernatural healing abilities? I'm suggesting he has something we've forgotten how to value. Wisdom, care, and truth that doesn't need a diploma. Silence settled in the courtroom. Then Daphne stood. If this child had been white, we wouldn't be here, she said, voice sharp. He'd be on Ellen. He'd have a scholarship named after him. But because he's black, and poor, and from nowhere you recognize, you treat him like a threat. The judge tapped his pen. Enough. No, Your Honor, Daphne said. It's never enough. Outside, thunder cracked. Inside, Margaret's hands trembled. The judge sighed. I will allow temporary custody, but only under the supervision of social services. Final ruling in 30 days. It was enough. For now. When Margaret walked into the holding center, Isaiah looked up, but didn't rise. He thought maybe she was a dream. She knelt beside him and cupped his face. You're coming home. He didn't cry. Not then. But that night, when he lay on the attic bed, clean and warm and fed, he whispered, "Thank you, Grandma," into the sheets, and slept for 12 hours. The peace didn't last. Someone left a dead bird on their porch, wings broken, blood soaking into the welcome mat. Margaret installed cameras. Charles cleaned the stain. Isaiah watched, quiet. You can fight hate with laws, Charles said one evening, but you can only melt it with love. Or burn it out, Isaiah murmured. Margaret turned sharply. We don't fight like that. But they do. I don't care. You're not becoming them. Isaiah nodded. But a piece of him didn't agree. Because deep inside him, something stirred. A memory of ash. Of fire licking the side of a house, while white boys laughed. He remembered hiding under the floorboards, his grandma's voice whispering, "Don't let them take your gift, baby. Make it sacred, even if it costs you." He hadn't used it fully since. Until now. The nightmares began again. Charles woke to find Isaiah standing in the hallway, eyes glazed, whispering to no one. Margaret pulled him gently back to bed. What did you see? They're coming, he whispered. One of them wears a badge. 3 days later, Officer Warren returned this time with 2 deputies and a court order. Anonymous report, he said, claims the boy is practicing witchcraft. Dangerous behavior. Possible endangerment of minors in the neighborhood. You're kidding, Charles said. I'm not. Isaiah stepped forward. You want to search the house? Warren hesitated. Son, it's not about wanting. It's about safety. I'm not the one you should be afraid of. Is that a threat? No, Isaiah said. It's a mirror. Warren stared at him like he was an equation he couldn't solve. Eventually, they left. Again. But Margaret saw the look in Isaiah's eyes as he watched them go. Something was changing. He was growing tired of forgiveness. That night, Margaret sat with him on the porch. You want revenge, she said softly. I want peace. But they won't let me have it. So what are you going to do? He looked at the stars. I'm going to show them what it means to see. She touched his hand. Don't become the storm. I'm not. I'm becoming the sky. And for a moment, she didn't know whether to be proud or afraid. But she loved him too much to stop him. Isaiah stopped waiting for permission. 1 week after the officers left, he began waking before dawn, barefoot in the dew-covered grass, whispering to the wind. Margaret watched him from the kitchen window, coffee in hand, unsure if what she felt was awe or dread. He was calling something, and something was answering. Charles didn't question it anymore. Every step he took now with only a cane was proof enough. He often sat beside Isaiah in the grass, letting the boy's words wash over him. He didn't understand them. He didn't need to. But the neighborhood noticed. A group of men, 4 of them, armed with suspicion and folding lawn chairs, gathered at the cul-de-sac's edge. One had a camcorder. Another wore a shirt that read, "My America doesn't look like this." On the 3rd day, one of them shouted, "This ain't Africa, boy." Take your voodoo back where it came from. Isaiah didn't flinch. He placed a feather into the soil. That night, it began to rain. Not a drizzle, not a thunderstorm. A strange, warm rain that smelled of cloves and firewood, like memory itself had fallen from the sky. It lasted 7 minutes. When it ended, Charles stood without his cane. He didn't realize it at first. He just walked back inside, humming, until Margaret burst into tears and pointed at his empty hand. I forgot, he whispered. Isaiah just smiled. You remembered. The videos hit social media within hours. Miracle boy heals white man with rain. Black child prophet in white suburbia. Science or sorcery? Some came in wonder. More came in fear. The next day, their mailbox was burned. Daphne called Margaret in a panic. You need to leave. Now. We can't. This is his home. It won't be for long. There's a petition going to the court, claims of child endangerment, cult practices, even emotional abuse. They're twisting everything. Margaret's voice shook. He hasn't hurt anyone. Not once. Doesn't matter. He frightens them. That's all it takes. Charles took the phone. Let them try, he said. They'll have to go through all of us. The final showdown came on a Sunday. Dozens gathered at the Ellisons' lawn. Some with signs. Others with phones. One man wore a sheriff's star over his hoodie. Isaiah stepped out the front door. He wore white. Not a robe. Not a costume. Just a white button-up shirt. Oversized, likely one of Charles's. It glowed against his skin like he carried the sun inside him. The crowd buzzed. Margaret wanted to stop him. Charles held her back. Let him speak. Isaiah stepped down to the lawn, barefoot as always. You think I'm dangerous, he said, loud and clear. You think I'm different. You're right. Murmurs rose. I am different, because I still believe in what you forgot. That healing is not a crime. That kindness is not weakness. That the sky doesn't care what color your house is. Only what grows underneath it. Someone shouted, this is a trick. Isaiah turned to them. You call what I do unnatural. But what's natural about burning a child's bed? About calling the cops on a boy who helped your neighbor walk again? No answer. Margaret stepped forward. We opened our home. You shut your hearts. Charles added. We lost everything in a crash. And found him in the wreckage. A woman in the crowd lowered her phone. She looked tired. Her hand slipped from the sign she'd been holding. It fell to the grass. Others followed. Not all, but enough. The man with the sheriff's star spat and walked away. And just like that, the crowd broke. Not with fire. Not with fists. With silence. A week later, the court met again. This time, Isaiah sat at the front. The judge was the same. His glasses fogged as he reviewed the footage, the testimonies, the petitions, and the letters signed by nearly every doctor Charles had seen. He looked up. In my 42 years on the bench, I've never seen a case like this, he said. This is no longer just about custody. This is about fear and belief and who we trust with our future. He turned to Isaiah. You are the future, son, whether the world is ready or not. Then he signed the order. Permanent guardianship, Margaret and Charles Ellison. The courtroom erupted in gasps, applause, protest, prayer. But Isaiah didn't react. He just turned and smiled at Margaret. Can I plant the garden now? They stayed on Magnolia Drive. Not because it was safe, but because it was sacred now. Children came. Not just from town, but from out of state. Sick children. Broken ones. Lost ones. Isaiah didn't heal all of them. He never promised to. But he listened. He touched their hands. He whispered things they never told anyone else. And sometimes, they got better. Sometimes, they just felt seen. Which, in this world, was already a miracle. On the first anniversary of Isaiah's arrival, the Ellisons hosted a gathering. No press. No live stream. Just people. Neighbors, doctors, teachers. A few who once held signs now brought casseroles. Others stayed away, bitter. But the house stood taller than it ever had. Margaret read a letter aloud, one Isaiah had written months ago, never meant to be read. I used to think I was cursed. That wherever I went, people burned. Now I know. It wasn't me that set the fires. It was them. I just refused to stay ashes. She paused, then looked at him. You're not ashes, she said. You're the spark. He looked away, suddenly shy. Years passed. Isaiah grew. He never called himself a healer. Others did. He just said, I listen. He got his documents. Finished school. Studied medicine but never stopped walking barefoot in the morning grass. One day, a publisher approached. asked if he'd write a book. He said no, but he gave them a title, The Boy Who Knocked. Isaiah stayed with the Ellisons until he was 18. Then he moved just 2 blocks away, built a small home with a garden that glowed at dusk. Children still came, adults too, not for magic, for memory, because there had been a boy once who stood on a porch and asked to be trusted. And in a world that said no 1,000 times, someone said yes. And everything changed. The end. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.